And here we are at episode 3, preparation. So the first thing you want to make sure that you have handy and readily available is your diagram. And this is my chart to show me exactly how I need to wire and set up the board. So I have that right next to me so I can always reference that as I'm working. The last episode we worked on getting the old electronics out and then weathering and doctoring up this hilt to be ready to receive new electronics. I'm really pleased with how this turned out. So now I'm going to set that aside because I'm not going to need it for a little while. So the first thing I want to do in my prep is make sure that I have all of my parts. And starting from the top to the bottom, I have everything for my LED. That's going to be the housing, the lens, the actual LED, the heat sink, and here's my pad that connects the LED to the heatsink, resistor, switch, soundboard, chassis, battery, recharge port, and speaker. So what I want to do is make sure that everything fits correctly. So I'll just do a quick little test here. I'm going to take my LED. This will be an adhesive on top of this pad here, but for now I just want to make sure everything's going to fit properly. So I'm going to set that on there, get my lens on. I'll put this closer so you can see. This won't be moving around as easily once I have the adhesive on there. And then the housing. There we go, there's the LED housing, and then I would test to make sure that it fits in the hilt, which it does, so no problem there. So I know that that is going to fit and work fine. Then I'm going to test my switch, make sure that fits in the housing well, which it does. Then I've got my chassis, make sure that that fits in where it needs to. Now for this one, this is not going to take a removable battery, so I want to test the fit of the battery into the chassis, and right there that feels very tight and snug. And with these 3D printed chassis, you may have to alter them just a little bit, so I have to go in here and smooth out some of the extra residue on the inside there, and so that way I can get a smooth slide in of the battery. So I have to make that adjustment a little bit later. And then I've got my recharge port here. Make sure that that fits. That's going to feed in from the bottom. And then keep in mind of how I'm going to feed my wires. And then I would attach the screw here and make sure that that tightens, and that will be good to go. That fits just fine. And then lastly is going to be the speaker. So I'm going to test that. This wire would feed in there, and that looks like it's going to be a nice comfortable fit as well. So now that I know all my parts will fit and work, that's the first step of my prep. The next thing is going to be soldering or doing a pre-tin of all of the joints on the board and on my components. And one thing to keep in mind is you never want to solder with the SD card in your soundboard. So I'm just going to remove that now so I don't have any problems with that later. And just to be safe, I'm going to put it in the electrostatic bag that it came in. Seal that up so I don't lose that, because that is the heart of your soundboard. If you don't have this, then you don't have sound. So I'm going to go ahead and clear out these parts here and get ready to pre-tin. So my soldering iron is warmed up and ready to go. I'm going to first start with the soundboard. Now, I want to make sure, I don't want to just pre-tin everything. One, because it's unnecessary work, and two, that way I can more clearly see what I have to work on. So the only pads I need are these, all of these large ones here. This is the battery positive, the board negative, or the ground, and then your RGB LED pads. So I need to pre-tin all of those. I don't need any of these pads on the bottom. And then up here, I just need the two on the end, that's for the speaker, and then this on the opposite end, that's for the switch. So all I'm going to do is just pre-tin all of those. And it's really important that you pre-tin all of your pads before you try to solder anything on there. So I'm going to secure it onto the hobby vise here. Grab my soldering iron. I like to dip it in a little flux just to kind of help the adhesion and to keep things clean. And then just apply to the board first, and then the solder. Want to get a nice good little dome over there so it's clean and silver. Once I'm done, I clear off my soldering iron. I have a sponge and that copper cleaner that I showed you in the intro video. So all the pads that I need to use on the soundboard are pre-tinned. And this is the side that I'm going to attach all of the wires to. And then the opposite side will be clean and clear, because I like to have no wires exposed and things like that. So that's the soundboard. Now I'm going to pre-tin the Tri-Cree LED. So you have the R, G, and the B. Here's your, and it's indicated on the LED, but you see there's your positive for the red LED, and then there's your pretty much your data or your negative for the red LED. So I'm going to pre-tin all of those pads. Now this is very important, and I made this mistake the first time I tried to wire. Do not stick the LED to the copper heatsink first. Always do your wiring and pre-tinning to the LED prior to attaching it to your heatsink. And the reason why is because this will dissipate and reduce the heat that comes from the soldering iron. Therefore, if your LED is connected to the heatsink, it's never going to get truly hot enough and melt the solder for you to be able to connect your wires and things. So this is a big, huge tip. This is one of the things that I found out through trial and error. Again, I'm not a professional installer, but I just kind of learn things along the way as I go. And since the LED is on a copper housing, this is one case where you want to apply some flux first to help it adhere to the copper. Okay, so a tip. Normally I keep my soldering iron at 350 degrees Celsius. You don't want to do too much higher than that because you risk damaging the electronics in the board. However, for this module here, with the copper, I upped it to 370 because the solder was hardening before it had a chance to really connect to the metal. So once I did that with a little bit of flux, I was able to get the pre-tin of all of the pads there. So that's just a tip that I use, and they aren't pretty. I'll be honest, I really hate soldering these copper base LEDs because it's just frustrating, but that'll work for now. Next pre-tin will be the recharge port. This one's already done because I have used this in the past, and that's done too. So you get the idea of what needs to happen there. Next pre-tin will be my switches. Normally my switches are more simple like this here, but this particular 16mm has a came with these screws that will attach in there. I'm not going to use those. I'm just going to solder it straight up as I would anything else, and then just kind of dip it into the hole there once I get the solder kind of warm and set. Yeah, so once I have my wire, I'll just warm that up, dunk the wire right in there, and then that'll seal up real good for that for the switch. This particular speaker was used before, and so it kind of already had some solder on there, but just kind of doctored up with the pre-tin there. Be careful with your speakers, at least I like to be, because if you apply the solder iron too long, you can start to melt the actual pad there, and the wire can come loose, and now your speaker is inoperable. So just be cautious of that. Don't apply too much heat for too long on your speakers, because if you notice here, that's just plastic, and that can easily melt off when you're trying to connect your wires. And my resistor has been pre-tinned on the tips there as well. So all of my pre-tinning of my components is complete at this point, and you also want to pre-tin your wires as well. I like to do a twist and a pre-tin, but I'll get into that later. So for now, if you can see down there, you can see how it's not very smooth. You've got some pieces and particle that's hanging out. I need to smooth those out, and I do that with a little bit of sandpaper to try to smooth that out, so that way my battery can slide in more comfortably, more easily. So I'll do that now. So it can be difficult to reach in there, so what I do is I take a bit of sandpaper, I put that into a roll, and then I place that on the inside. It expands out a little bit, and then I just lift and twist and spin to get those spots deep on the inside that are difficult to hit. And I do that on both ends. Tap out the residue, and as you can see, all those gritty pieces are just about gone. So we got a little bit over there on the left side, and then I finger in there, and it's feeling pretty smooth. It's feeling much better. Get all that last bit of residue out, and then test with my battery, and now as you see, that slides in pretty good. And you don't want to be too loose, because it'll slide all the way through, but this is perfect. I can push it in and it's not going to go anywhere, and I can grab that and pull it back out. So I'm going to wipe it down a little bit more, get all the extra little dust out of there, and this chassis will be prepped and ready to be filled. One other thing I noticed is on the inside here, if you see on the left there how you don't have clear space running through, you can still see some of the residue of the 3D printing, and that's where I need to be able to run wires through. So just a little tidbit or trick here. I've got this little wooden kind of skewer here that you can use to make shish kebabs or roast marshmallows with. I take that and I kind of work that in. You see, this is where your wire is going to need to go. I work that in and try to clear out any of that extra residue that might block my wires from easily sliding through when I'm ready to fit the everything into the Saber. Sometimes feeding wires can be very frustrating when you're working on a Saber. So going through this step first will save you some frustration later. Just making sure all that's good to go. Clearing out anything in the way. knock out any residue. And let's see. It's a little bit better. So that does help. And then I take my Dremel here, got a little brush on there, just kind of work in there a little bit to clear out anything that might obstruct my wires going through. Okay. Give it a little blow. And let's give it a look now. It's a little bit better. Shouldn't have any trouble getting my wires to feed through now. So before I can really start wiring the Tri-Cree LEDs, I need to make sure which color is where. Now generally, if you put the red on the bottom, if you go clockwise, you have your red, green, and blue, RGB. But it's always good to double check that. So to test that, well, I just have a small little battery pack here, and then I'm going to run some power through and test the pads. Now normally I should use alligator clips or something like that, but this is the best that I have for now. Again, amateur installer. So let's just go ahead and do a tap here. This will be very bright, so don't look directly at it. Alright, so there's our green. We know that this is red because you can see the red right there on the bottom. And then, so if that's red, that's green, then we know over here is going to be our blue. Yep, there's our blue. Okay. So good to know. So we've got our red down here, green, and our blue. So I know exactly how and where to wire that. And I like to use, of course, green wire for the green, blue wire for the blue. I use orange wire for the red, and the reason why is because I use red wire for the positive power connection. I got done prepping everything and forgot the most important part, and that is making sure that the soundboard fits into the chassis. And when I checked that, it's not the right fit, as you can see there. This is designed for a CFX, not a Verso. And I could still use it, but it's not going to be snug the way I want it to, so I'm not going to use this. They gave me the wrong order. I'll use this in another build where I can use the CFX in there. So instead I have from a previous project this universal chassis here. And it does allow for a removable battery, and I've got the recharge port already in there on the side. So with this I can actually secure the board with that Velcro strap and it won't move anywhere. So I'm going to go with this one for the remainder of the project. I did test everything else, and the speaker does fit in there. So this just goes to show, always test and check to make sure all of your parts fit before you begin putting anything together or connecting any wires. So at this point I've checked all of my components for fitment. Everything fits, everything is ready to go, and my components are pre-tinned. So in the next episode we're going to start wiring this up and putting it onto the board.